Tactical empathy, for the definition, let's get that out of the way first. That's your deliberate attempt at recognizing the perspective of another person, and then more importantly, articulating that recognition. Because when it's all said and done, all of us have an innate desire or drive to have someone else understand our perspective and our view of the world. You don't understand their worldview, you don't understand them. You don't understand them, you're not going to be able to influence them. And where the concept of not pursuing common ground or not liking the other side, that's born directly out of hostage negotiations. Because, I mean, you can probably imagine, I didn't have any common ground with the people that I negotiated with inside the crisis site. I certainly didn't like them very much, and I certainly didn't agree with their action, but none of that is necessary. I just have to demonstrate for them that I understand what the lay of the land looks like from their perspective. And, you know, in the States, at least, as hostage negotiators, we've gotten to be pretty good at it. Our success rate of employing tactical empathy to influence surrender is somewhere around 93%. And so this is not something that's theoretical. This is something that's been tested and proven in some of the highest of stakes conversations out there. And so I say all of that to say, hostage negotiators and sociopaths, those two groups of people are the best purveyors of tactical empathy on the planet. And both groups of people use it not because they're nice people, but we use it because it works. You know, Ted Bundy, Gustavo, you've heard me tell the story before. Ted Bundy was executed for the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Florida. And that number, one, pales in comparison to the number of murders that he was actually involved in. And so you got to ask yourself, how was this guy able to get seemingly intelligent young people into positions of compromise that ultimately cost them everything? It was because he had a keen appreciation of tactical empathy and he knew how to execute.
Okay, so it's a powerful tool. It works. It's effective, obviously. So what? I don't. It's really interesting to think about, but it's really about being able to put yourself inside the mind of not put yourself inside what somebody else is feeling, what somebody else is thinking, how they see the world, and then show them that you understand it. The
last part of what you just said is critical. Show them that you understand and articulate it for them. That's the important thing. You don't need to feel what they feel to demonstrate tactical empathy. Yeah, there's that old saying that you need to walk a mile in another man's shoes to understand what he's going through. And that's tantamount to feeling what he feels. And you don't need to feel what they feel. You need to not walk in their shoes, but to see through their eyes. Because their perception is going to be dramatically different from your perception. And it's easy for us to say, well, that's wrong, and then turn off our listening. We focus on our own internal monologue. That's the easiest thing for us to do, is to assume that what they're telling us is wrong and then turn off. And so with tactical empathy, what you're doing is you're saying to yourself, I have something to learn in this conversation. And if you approach every difficult conversation, whether it's with a caregiver, whether it's with an employee or an employer, whether it's with a family member, regardless of how long that relationship has been in existence, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 years, you go into a difficult conversation, go in suspending judgment and assume that you have something to learn about the perspective of the person that you're engaged with. That does a couple of things. That keeps you on the hunt, if you will, for new information, but it also prevents you from getting triggered during the conversation, because your brain doesn't really work that way. Your brain cannot be triggered and curious at the same time. You're either going to be angry or you're going to be curious. You can't be both. And so staying curious, suspending judgment is what tactical empathy is all about.
Viola is asking, can we get an example of demonstrating an understanding of somebody else's perspective? I'm sure you have plenty of examples, but if you don't mind, I'd just like to tell one quick story.
Sure.
Sure. So Derek, when I first met you and Chris and Brandon in person for the training, I walked into the room and you were all very friendly, and I could tell that Chris wanted to say something to me. He wanted to already demonstrate tactical empathy, but he wasn't sure what to say. So he just said something nice. He held off. Later on during a break, we're walking back into the room and Chris stops me and he says to me, you know what? You seem like the type of person who doesn't give up easily. And that it's not all of me, but that label showed that he understood a core part of my personality. He saw somebody with a disability who was there doing his thing, and he acknowledged that I probably have a lot of perseverance in my life. I probably don't take no for an answer easily. And that felt really good. And the reason I still remember that label is for two reasons. One, he understood a part of me without, just through observation and trying to get inside my head. And number two, it was a great teaching moment right there of the power of a label.
And I've never really been able to pronounce this correctly. Is it Viola or Viola?
So
it should be either, but I go by Viola.
Okay, Viola.
Yeah,
That was a perfect example. That was a perfect example of demonstrating tactical empathy. But Gustavo did not walk into our event and say to the world, I don't give up easy. I don't take no for an answer. Nowhere in his initial dialogue with anybody, at least on the instructor cadre, did he ever say that. So how did Chris leap to that conclusion? He made a situationally insightful, intelligent guess based on the data that Gustavo was giving off just by being present in the room. That's where tactical empathy starts, is your observation. Before you can recognize their perspective and then articulate it, it has to come from data given off by the other person. So what you heard Chris do for him there was just a simple label. He just labeled the dynamics as he saw it. He's saying to Gustavo, this is the data that I'm picking up from you. And you notice that he structured it with, it seems like you're not the type of guy to give up easy. He said, it seems like. He didn't say this is a fact. He said, it seems like. Translation, this is what I'm picking up from you. And because he laid it out with, it seems like, he's always going to be on safe ground, because either Gustavo is going to have the reaction that he did, or he's going to correct Chris and tell him what the actual facts are, which is the main reason why we use it looks, it seems, it sounds. It provides us with a little safety net, because even if he had crossed the line with Gustavo based on that label, he never said that Gustavo was a person who didn't give up. He said he seemed like. So that gives him wiggle room to be corrected by Gustavo if Chris's label was wrong. And you guys should know that one of the laws of negotiation gravity is the desire to correct is irresistible. Because the desire to correct is irresistible, even if you get your label wrong, you're going to get more information, because people can't wait to tell you how you got it wrong. They can't wait to tell you how stupid you are. They can't wait to tell you how you're way off the mark. So even if Chris had gotten it wrong, that desire to correct would have led Gustavo to correct him and provide more information. But the beautiful part about that story is that it illustrates that listening and observing is the cheapest and most effective concession that you can make one person to another. It makes people, to Gustavo's point, feel so good when you start to identify, especially latent dynamics and emotions on the other side. As I said before, that was a latent dynamic that Chris picked up on, because Gustavo never said anything about not being a quitter. But Chris picked up on it. In every difficult conversation, if you are in tune with the other person, you're going to uncover the presenting dynamic or emotion. If you're really good, the latent dynamic or emotion, because when you start to identify dynamics and emotions that have not been articulated yet, there's no clearer way to demonstrate that you're dialed in with another person, which is why it put so much wind in Gustavo's sails after Chris said that, because that was a latent dynamic or emotion, something that he hadn't spoken into existence. And it feels really good when people are able to label things that you haven't spoken into the ether.
I mean, Chris could have said so many things, right? He could have said, boy, it seems like you have it rough. That would have been a totally different reaction.
Sure.
Right? And then I would have corrected him and said, well, not really, Chris, but he took another, he observed it. Like you said, it was an educated guess. He made a good observation. And it resonated to the point where I still remember it. What is it? 2 years later, 2.5 years later. Right.
Because what happens is, in that moment, this is another powerful attribute, I guess, of tactical empathy. In that moment, you got to hit a dopamine and you got to hit a oxytocin. That's where that good feeling comes from. That's what makes it a lasting memory for you. That's what you're doing with the people that you interact with when you engage in tactical empathy. You're giving them small hits of dopamine, small hits of oxytocin, and they don't know, they can't really put their finger on it, but they know that, wow, talking to Gustavo is a pleasure. We've talked about labels. It looks like, it seems like, it sounds like. One of the other techniques out of the quick 2+1 are mirrors, where you're just repeating back the last 1 to 3 words that the other side has given you. Their words coming out of your mouth. To me, there's probably not a clearer way to demonstrate that you're dialed into the conversation than when you actually use their words and you speak them back into their ear. And Chris and Brandon, the president of the company, did a training session at a yoga retreat, if you can get your mind around that. They did a training session at a yoga retreat, and one of the people there, they wound up nicknaming him Johnny Mirrors, because all he did for the entire 2 days of the conference is, not all he did, but the majority of the conversations that he was engaged in, he was throwing out mirror after mirror after mirror after mirror. And he became a hit of the conference because there were no shortage of people that were walking up to his wife going, your husband is the greatest. I had such an enjoyable time talking to him. He listened so well, and it's all because all he did was mirror the entire time, which is how he got his nickname. But the fact that he was taking other people's words and giving them right back to them almost verbatim sent them through the roof. They loved it. They love the fact that they've got somebody who's actually being attentive to them during the course of the conversation. He identified himself as an outlier in that regard, because most people don't listen to that depth throughout the course of the day. And so when we encounter someone who does, oh my gosh, it feels great. If you guys don't believe me, you try this low stakes practice. Low stakes practice. Go to your favorite store and engage whoever's working behind the counter with the common salutation, how are you today? Wait for their response, and then whatever response they give you, label the dynamic or label the emotion that you're picking up on, and watch what happens to them. Watch how that barista at Starbucks, they get asked 100 times a day, how are you? 99 people that ask that question to them do not care. It's a throwaway salutation. That's how we say hello now. How's it going? Nobody cares. But you throw out a how's it going, wait for their response, and then label that response and watch how much more information you get from that person working behind the counter. Now, I would tell you to be cautious in your execution in this regard, because you're going to wind up making everybody standing behind you in line angry because you and the barista or you and the person working the counter are going to be engaged in the conversation for a substantive amount of time, because nobody in that person's workday has taken the time to actually demonstrate that they're listening.